He ruled the city with an iron fist, but today, he froze. The woman he destroyed 8 months ago was kneeling at another's feet, pregnant and staring straight at him. Every secret, every betrayal, every lie he believed shattered in an instant. Would he lose her forever? Or could love survive even the darkest past? Watch till the very last second, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, I want to know, where are you listening to me from? Drop it in the comments, and also tell me, how would you rate my stories out of 10? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our dramatic, heart-pounding tales. Alright, enough talk, let's dive right into the story. Willie's hand hovered over the door handle of the boutique, the polished brass warm under his palm, and the faint scent of rain from the streets clinging to his leather jacket. The city's chaos seemed to fall away behind him, replaced by the soft hum of air conditioning and the muted click of high heels against marble floors. He could hear Camille's voice, delicate and rehearsed, greeting the boutique attendant, but his ears caught nothing but the faint scrape of metal against fabric. The moment the door opened fully, a wave of white silk unfurled like smoke, and Willie's world narrowed. She was there, kneeling, focused, completely unaware, and yet utterly commanding his attention. Nora. He hadn't seen her since that night, the argument, the slammed door, the furious rain, and suddenly, 8 months felt like an eternity compressed into this single, unbearable instant. Her hands were trembling, or maybe it was the needle catching the light that made them look so fragile. He noticed the faint indentations along her knuckles, evidence of tension, or maybe exhaustion, and a trace of lavender from the soap she had used that morning. Willie felt his chest tighten, the sensation almost physical, a claw gripping around his ribs. How had she ended up here, at Camille's side, at this very boutique, kneeling over the silk he had bought for another woman? His mind fought against the flood of emotions, but every rational thought disintegrated when his gaze fell lower, to the subtle, undeniable curve beneath her apron. The outline of a heavy belly, unmistakably 8 months pregnant, shifted slightly as she adjusted the fabric. The air between them seemed to stop moving. Camille's delicate voice, the giggle of the boutique assistant, even the faint hum of the air conditioner, all vanished. Willie felt the weight of years, mistakes, and unanswered questions pressing down, a silent gravity that made his knees ache. He stepped forward unconsciously, drawn by a force he could not name, and then froze. The silver needle clinked against the marble floor as Nora's eyes lifted to meet his. There was shock there, yes, but also something colder, harder. A steel edge he had never seen before, and for a moment, the man who ruled the city felt small, fragile, exposed. Nora's breath caught, a soft hitch that made his stomach twist. Her lips parted slightly, the faint tremor of pain or fear or both shaping her expression. He wanted to speak, to bridge the silence, but his voice betrayed him, stuck somewhere in the tight coil of his chest. He realized then that the city, the power, the empire he controlled, meant nothing here. Nothing compared to this, the woman he had loved, discarded, and yet could not forget, standing a breath away with the proof of his absence pressed to her body. He noticed the way her hair fell in soft waves, golden under the boutique lights, framing her face like a halo that made every wrong he had done feel unbearably sharp. The fabric of the dress she was pinning shifted as her hands moved, and with it, the subtle rhythm of her breathing, measured and cautious. Willie's own hands itched to reach out, to touch, to undo the months of mistakes in a single motion, but he stopped himself. He couldn't. Not yet. Not while she looked at him like he was a stranger who had the audacity to appear in her life again. A bead of sweat traced down her temple, catching the light. She hadn't expected him, that was clear, and yet she didn't flinch, her body poised, defensive, like a dancer mid-performance, elegant and controlled. Willie's mind raced, each second stretching, every heartbeat a hammer in his chest. The boutique's soft lighting made her eyes shine, sharp and piercing, as if she could see through the layers of pretense he had built around himself. Have you ever walked into a place, thinking you were in control, only to realize the universe had rewritten the rules in a single glance? He wanted to ask the audience that, to make someone, anyone, understand what it was like to see the person who had once consumed your soul now utterly unreachable. He shifted his weight, careful not to make a sound, and felt the marble floor cool beneath his polished shoes. Camille turned, sensing perhaps the tension, the way the room seemed to compress, but Willie didn't see her. Every thought, every memory, every shred of desire and regret was tangled in the moment, anchored on the woman kneeling before him. Nora's fingers, small and delicate, traced the hemline with a precision born of habit and pride, unaware, or pretending to be unaware, of the storm standing over her. His lips parted, but no sound emerged, only the shallow, desperate inhale that betrayed his composure. Her eyes flickered, a hint of recognition, or was it accusation? And the air thickened. The scent of silk, of lavender, and the faint tang of sweat from hours of laborious sewing hit him simultaneously. It was intimate, overwhelming, and it drove a rush of memories through him: late-night arguments, whispered laughter, the scent of rain on her hair after a fight. He remembered the rain-soaked street outside his apartment, the date etched in his memory: April 23rd, a Thursday, when he had walked away and slammed the door on everything he thought he wanted. Now, here she was, and he realized that no empire, no wealth, no control over life itself could shield him from the raw, unyielding impact of her presence. Nora's breath hitched as she shifted her weight slightly, and the heavy curve of her belly pressed against the apron. She was steady, and yet fragile, a paradox that left him unmoored. He wanted to ask her, to demand an explanation, but she anticipated his thought, raising a hand in silent command. "Don't move, sir," she whispered, the words low, deliberate, cutting through the thick tension of the room. "You're standing on the veil." It was a simple statement, but it hit him like a bullet. The needle clattered again, once more, echoing in the boutique's polished expanse, a sound he would never forget. He realized in that instant that she wasn't the woman he had left. She had grown, hardened, evolved in ways he had no access to. And yet, he was trapped in the old hunger, the feral need that had driven him to love her and ruin her in equal measure. Camille, oblivious, twirled, adjusting the folds of her dress, and he felt the absurd cruelty of the moment. Here, surrounded by silk and crystal chandeliers, a private apocalypse unfolded in silence. His hands ached to move, to reach, to kneel beside her and plead forgiveness, but the steel in her gaze kept him frozen. He saw the faint lines of strain on her forehead, the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted the hem, and realized that every step of her life for the past 8 months had been without him. 8 months of carrying, 8 months of enduring, 8 months of pain and resilience, and here he was, the man who had caused it, standing helplessly in a room that no longer belonged entirely to him. Willie's chest felt tight, each inhale a struggle, as if the boutique itself had decided to hold its breath. The soft clinking of tools, the faint rustle of silk, the almost imperceptible hum of the air conditioning, every sound etched itself into his memory. His lips moved slightly, forming a single word, but before it could leave him, Nora's gaze hardened further, colder, sharper. The room contracted, drawing him into her orbit of quiet authority and quiet fury. And then, just as he opened his mouth to speak her name, a faint creak from the pedestal under Camille's heels snapped his attention for a second, a reminder that the world still existed outside this frozen moment. Willie felt a jolt, not of fear, but of recognition. Life had continued while he had stayed frozen in his mistakes, and now he had to navigate the consequences of absence. Every second stretched, every heartbeat thundered in his ears, every breath tasted of silk, sweat, and inevitable confrontation. The boutique seemed impossibly vast, filled with light and shadows, each a reminder of time he could never reclaim. And yet, she knelt there, every inch the same woman he had adored, every inch transformed by survival and determination, and every inch unyielding. The silence stretched, dense and almost unbearable, and in that suspended moment, he realized he was utterly powerless, utterly captivated, and utterly condemned by the sight of her, by the curve of her belly, by the cold steel of her voice. Nora's eyes lingered on him, searching, measuring, daring him to speak, to move, to betray his intentions. Her hand, poised over the hem, trembled faintly as if the weight of the room pressed on her as well. And Willie felt the gravity of what had been lost, of what had never been regained, of what might never be spoken aloud again. The boutique's lights flickered momentarily, catching the folds of silk, throwing shadows that danced like memories on the walls. His throat tightened, his knees threatened to buckle, his heartbeat roared. And still, she did not move. "Sir," she said again, her voice softer but no less commanding. "One wrong step and—" Her words hung unfinished, a blade of tension slicing the air. And in that moment, Willie understood fully that everything, his pride, his control, his empire, meant nothing compared to the fragile, aching presence of the woman before him. The world had narrowed to the ivory silk, the trembling needle, the curve of her belly, and the frozen fire in her eyes. And as he took a single, measured step back, unwilling to betray the vulnerability that threatened to drown him, Nora's eyes did not soften. The boutique was silent, the only sound the faint rustle of silk settling back into place, and Willie realized with a horror that bordered on awe, he was standing on the edge of everything, and one misstep could shatter it entirely. The boutique's polished marble seemed to press against Willie's feet, as if the floor itself demanded he stay still, that he could not move without consequence. Each breath he drew felt jagged, shards of air cutting through his lungs like broken glass, and yet he could not tear his eyes away from her. Nora, kneeling beside the silk, her hands poised, precise, as if the fabric were a living thing she had sworn to protect. was the only motion in the room, and it both terrified and captivated him. Her hair fell forward slightly, golden strands brushing against her temples, and he noticed the faint sheen of sweat that betrayed the effort of keeping herself upright, of maintaining control in a world that had once shattered her. Willie's mind flashed to that rainy night, the one he had tried to erase. The streets slick with water, his anger like fire, her small frame drenched and shivering in the downpour, and the accusation he had hurled like a weapon that she had betrayed him. Every memory was raw, every detail sharp, the date, March 18th, and the rain that had soaked the city like it knew he had been wrong. He had walked away thinking he was right, thinking the empire demanded sacrifices, never realizing the one person who had sacrificed everything for him had been Nora. Now, seeing her kneeling there, thin-faced and heavy with his child, he understood the true weight of his error, and it pressed down on him like the leaden air in a tomb. The air between them seemed to thicken, dense, almost viscous, and the boutique's soft lighting no longer comforted him. Every shimmer on the polished counters, every reflected glint of crystal chandeliers, seemed sharper than it should be, cutting through the veneer of calm. He watched her hands move, nimble and precise, anchoring the fabric, smoothing folds, pinning the silk with a patience that bordered on mechanical. And yet, beneath that precision, he could see the tension, the slight quiver in her fingers, the faint lift of her shoulders every few seconds, the careful shifting of her weight as she balanced herself against the floor. Each movement screamed of effort, endurance, and quiet suffering. Camille's voice floated in the background, polite, distant, utterly irrelevant. Willie realized he had not heard a word she said since entering the boutique. His gaze was locked on Nora, tracing the delicate curve of her back beneath the apron, the subtle sway of her belly as she leaned over her work. She smelled faintly of lavender and linen, of effort and sweat, a scent that pressed against his chest and made him ache. Each inhalation seemed to remind him of every night he had spent alone, every hour he had squandered chasing shadows and illusions, while the one person who had truly cared endured everything quietly, without complaint, without acknowledgement. He swallowed hard, the sound loud in the tense quiet, and felt the hot sting of guilt crawling along his throat. His hand itched, trembling slightly, an involuntary gesture as if his body could not reconcile the reality before him. She looked up, briefly, her eyes catching his, and in that instant, time fractured. For a split second, he saw all the moments they had shared, the laughter, the rage, the tenderness he had ignored, and it collided with the months of absence, the loss, the betrayal he had inflicted upon himself by believing lies. Her eyes were steady now, hard, and yet there was a faint flicker, memory, recognition, pain or warning. It was impossible to decipher, and that uncertainty twisted something inside him. He took a cautious step forward, the polished floor cold beneath his shoes, and his stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed to kneel, to apologize, to take her into his arms and beg forgiveness. But he stopped himself, realizing that desire alone could not undo the months of suffering, the nights she had endured alone, the child growing inside her from a union he had abandoned. The boutique seemed impossibly large now, each chandelier beam stretching the silence, reflecting his helplessness back at him. He noticed the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders, the controlled way she leaned into her work, the way her breath caught occasionally when a stitch resisted, or when the silk shifted beneath her hands. Nora's voice finally broke the silence, low and controlled, a whisper that carried more authority than he thought possible. "Seer," she said, measured, precise, yet laced with something beneath, a warning, a thread of venom. "Do not." She paused, the word unfinished, her attention flicking briefly to the silk, then back to him, as if daring him to move. The room seemed to constrict around him, every breath heavy, every heartbeat a drum echoing through the polished marble walls. Willie's chest tightened, he felt the weight of everything, the empire, the mistakes, the silence of months, all pressing down, demanding acknowledgement. He reached out, almost unconsciously, a single hand toward her shoulder, imagining the contact, imagining the reassurance, the desperate plea for reconciliation. But the moment his fingers brushed the edge of her sleeve, she flinched violently. The motion was instinctive, raw, a defense honed by pain and months of caution. The needle slipped from her fingers, clattering against the marble floor like a gunshot in the silence. She teetered, the fabric slipping slightly, and for a heartbeat Willie thought she might fall onto the sharp edge of a glass table beside her. He froze, panic lancing through him. Every polished surface seemed suddenly threatening. The table gleamed under the soft lights, harmless in appearance but deadly in potential. Nora caught herself with one hand on the silk, her breath quickening, her face pale and tight, and Willie felt a cold wave of helplessness wash over him. If she had fallen, if he had caused her harm, he knew he would never forgive himself. And yet, he could not stop himself from inching forward, trembling, his mind a chaos of fear, guilt, and longing. Her eyes met his again, and in them, he saw the full measure of months spent without him, the exhaustion, the silent endurance, the rage and fear simmering beneath the surface. Willie's chest constricted as if the air itself had turned to iron. He wanted to speak, to explain, to demand forgiveness, but the words died in his throat, and the silence pressed back, louder than any accusation. The boutique was full of stillness now, thick, almost tangible, wrapping around him like chains. The hum of the air conditioning, the faint scrape of silk, the soft click of his shoes against marble, everything was amplified in the tension of the moment. He realized he was utterly exposed, utterly powerless, standing before the one woman whose love had been genuine while his life had been built on illusions. Each of his steps forward was a negotiation with fate itself, every inch closer to her a test of courage, restraint, and humility. Nora's hand tightened on the fabric, her nails pressing faint crescent marks into the silk. She didn't speak, but the tension in her shoulders, the measured lift of her brow, the wary tilt of her head, all screamed warning, command defiance. Willie's fingers hovered, trembling above her shoulder, and he realized that even the smallest gesture could shatter the fragile balance they were precariously holding. And then, just as he was about to risk the final step, the boutique door chimed faintly, distant, almost ghostly, a reminder that the world still existed outside this tense standoff. Willie's pulse thundered in his ears, every muscle coiled, every breath shallow. Nora's gaze followed his, sharp and unyielding, measuring warning, daring him to make a choice. His hand moved a fraction closer, and then, in a sudden, terrifying instant, her balance faltered completely. The silk shifted beneath her and Willie lunged instinctively, hands reaching for her. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension, every sound magnified, the soft thump of her knee against the marble, the scrape of fabric, the clatter of pins scattering. The boutique's light reflected off the glass table edge just inches from her and Willie's chest seized. He felt frozen, helpless, trapped in a moment that demanded action yet punished it. Time slowed, the seconds stretching into eternity. He could see every detail, the faint sheen of sweat on her brow, the subtle quiver of her lips, the taut line of her neck, the curve of the baby bump beneath the apron. Everything that had ever mattered, everything he had ever lost, condensed into this single, excruciating instant. Nora's eyes met his one last time before the motion ended, and in that gaze Willie read everything: accusation, pain, endurance, warning. And then, as if the world itself held its breath, the scene froze. The boutique lights cast long, harsh shadows across the silk, the marble, and the tiny, trembling figure of the woman he had loved and ruined, teetering on the edge of disaster, and Willie's hands hovered, powerless, over a life he might shatter with a single misstep. The boutique's polished marble still burned in Willie's mind, the memory of Nora teetering on the glass table refusing to fade. He didn't sleep that night. He didn't retreat to the cold comfort of his penthouse filled with sterile opulence. Instead, he drove through the rain, slick streets of New York, each passing neon sign reflecting like shards of broken promises in his eyes. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the leather creaked beneath his knuckles, and his gaze was fixed on the silhouette he had memorized, the slow, deliberate movements of Nora as she vanished into the city's chaos. Every stoplight became a heartbeat, every puddle a mirror reflecting his regret back at him, taunting him with the consequences of his pride. He followed her at a distance, weaving through narrow alleys and abandoned streets, feeling a knot of guilt tightening with every step she took. The SUV's tires hummed against the asphalt as he watched her climb 3 flights of crumbling concrete stairs outside a dilapidated apartment complex on the edge of the city. Each step she took seemed to pull him deeper into a nightmare he had created for himself. He noticed the way she paused twice, clutching her stomach, wincing as if the weight of the life inside her was a silent indictment of his cruelty. The streetlights flickered above, casting elongated shadows that danced like ghosts across the peeling paint and rusted fire escapes. Through the windshield, Willie could see the strain etched into her face, the pale exhaustion under her eyes, the tight curve of her lips pressed against the silent scream she refused to voice. Her hair, tangled and damp from the evening's rain, clung to her temples, and he could almost feel the chill that must have gnawed at her skin. A thin coat did little to shield her from the biting wind, and he realized with a sharp pang that he had been blind to everything: her pain, her struggle, her silent endurance. Every heartbeat that echoed in the SUV reminded him of the months he had squandered, the nights he had spent in comfort while she suffered, alone and unacknowledged. He recalled the reports from his private investigator, details he had tried to suppress: Nora working 3 separate jobs, refusing to utter his name, hiding from every opportunity for assistance that bore even a trace of his influence. She had sold her engagement ring, a symbol of love he had thoughtlessly discarded, not to feed herself or her unborn child, but to cover the medical bills of a stray dog she had rescued from the freezing streets. The image of her kneeling beside that injured animal, delicate hands bandaging a tiny body with the same care she had once shown him, struck him like lightning, leaving him gasping for air in the SUV's cramped interior. Her heart had remained pure, unbroken, despite his attempt to crush it, and the realization hit him harder than any business loss, harder than any betrayal he had ever suffered. The rain fell harder now, each droplet a drumbeat in his ears, and he noticed her silhouette pause at the top of the stairs. She looked over her shoulder briefly, scanning the empty streets as if sensing a predator, her brow furrowed in caution. Willie's pulse quickened, every muscle taut, every instinct screaming at him to intervene, to protect, to beg forgiveness. He wanted to leap from the SUV, to wrap her in his arms, to shield her from a world that had been cruel to her in his absence. But he didn't move yet. He watched, frozen, the shadows of the crumbling buildings mirroring the shadow of his own failures. The alley was narrow, littered with debris and the stale scent of rot and decay, a world away from the polished marble and chandelier, lit boutique where their collision had begun. Willie felt the chill bite through his jacket, a reminder that while he had ruled empires and commanded respect, he was powerless in the face of the suffering he had caused. Each step Nora took was a negotiation with gravity, a balancing act between the life growing inside her and the weight of the world pressing down from every side. He noticed the subtle stiffness in her back, the careful placement of her feet, the way she held her stomach as if it were a fragile, sacred object that must not be harmed under any circumstance. Her apartment door creaked as she entered, the sound thin and fragile like paper tearing. Willie parked a few cars down, the SUV's engine humming softly as he watched through tinted windows. Inside, the apartment was a world apart from his penthouse, a cramped space with peeling wallpaper, a faint smell of mildew, and the harsh aroma of cheap heating oil. Every piece of furniture seemed secondhand, patched or scuffed, telling the story of months spent scraping together survival from the edges of the city. He could see her moving carefully across the floor, her hands steady as she placed groceries on the counter, the strain in her movements hidden beneath a practiced grace. A small table in the corner held a tiny bed, clearly for a child, though barren of toys or comforts. The sight struck Willie like a physical blow, the stark reality of her life, and the reality of the child they had created, pressed on him with a force that left him breathless. He remembered the nights he had spent counting profits, the hours lost to meetings and contracts, oblivious to the life he had a hand in creating, oblivious to the silent, patient endurance of the woman he had once loved. Guilt gnawed at him, twisting in his chest, sharp and unrelenting, while his pride, the pride that had once made him fearless, crumbled beneath the weight of what he now knew. Nora moved with a quiet rhythm, organizing her meager belongings, every motion deliberate, every gesture measured. The faint smell of coffee, the aroma of bread, the metallic tang of her blood from a small paper cut she ignored, filled the cramped apartment with a living, breathing humanity that the sterile luxury of his penthouse could never replicate. Willie felt like an intruder, a voyeur to a life he had neglected, and yet he could not tear his eyes away. Every sound, the scrape of a chair, the soft sigh as she adjusted her clothes, the quiet hum of the radiator, punched through the silence of his mind, demanding recognition, demanding acknowledgement. He thought of speaking, of calling out, of revealing himself, but the fear in her eyes, brief, subtle, wary, stopped him. Her gaze, even in fleeting glances, carried the weight of months of survival without him, months of fighting against a world that had forgotten her. He realized that approaching her now might do more harm than good, that his presence, unannounced, might shatter the fragile balance she had achieved. His hands itched to reach for her, to offer support, to beg forgiveness, but he stayed rooted in the SUV, every nerve on edge. The night deepened, and with it, the shadows in the alley stretched, wrapping around the buildings like silent watchers. Willie's chest tightened as he noticed movement, a figure stepping out from the darkness, the silhouette unfamiliar but menacing. The faint glint of metal caught the streetlight, a knife reflecting the harsh, unforgiving glow. Willie's pulse jumped violently, every muscle tensed, every instinct screaming danger. His mind raced, he could call his bodyguards, he could retreat, he could risk everything. But the image of Nora, vulnerable and unaware, froze him in place. The figure stepped closer, the shadows shifting with each deliberate motion, and Willie could see the cruel curve of a grin beneath the hooded jacket. The knife caught the light again, and his stomach dropped. The reality of the danger, immediate and lethal, pressed down on him with a weight unlike any other. Nora, still inside, unaware of the predator waiting just steps away, moved with a fragile grace that seemed to mock his hesitation. The alley smelled of wet asphalt and fear, thick and suffocating, and Willie felt the cold sting of panic in his fingertips, the iron taste of adrenaline in his mouth. He considered rushing out, but the knife, the shadowed figure, the cramped space, everything warned him to think, to strategize, to act with precision. Nora's well-being, his unborn child's safety, the delicate balance of survival, all hung in the balance. Every heartbeat echoed in the alley, loud and urgent, marking time against the inevitability of a confrontation he could no longer avoid. The alley smelled of wet asphalt, decay, and fear. Rain dripped from the broken fire escape above, hitting Willie's shoulders with cold stings as he crouched behind the wheel of his SUV, every nerve screaming. The shadowed figure in the alley lunged forward, knife glinting under the dull glow of the streetlight. Willie's world narrowed to a single point: Nora, fragile, carrying the weight of his unborn child, completely unaware of the danger that had slipped between the shadows. His body reacted before thought, muscles coiling, every instinct honed over years of ruthless business dealings and street fights screaming into motion. The first punch he threw connected with a solid crack, the man's jaw snapping back violently, and the knife clattered to the wet ground. Nora stumbled backward at the sound, eyes wide, chest heaving with panic. "Willie, what are you doing?" she stammered, clutching her stomach instinctively, as though her child might be shattered with every echoing sound. Her voice cracked like glass under pressure, fragile but urgent, and it hit Willie like a hammer to the chest. The adrenaline didn't fade, it surged. The man lunged again, but Willie's reflexes were sharper than ever, a brutal combination of training, instinct, and desperation. Each strike sent the attacker skidding on the slick concrete, and within seconds, the man crumpled unconscious in a wet, shivering heap. Willie turned to Nora, expecting the slightest relief. A whispered thank you, a flicker of trust restored. But the sight that greeted him froze the blood in his veins. Her body shook violently, not from the fight, not from fear of the mugger, but from fear of him. The intensity in her eyes wasn't gratitude, it was terror. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling and broken, "don't take the baby, Willie. You can have the world, just leave me my child." Her hands, rough and calloused from months of sewing and labor, pressed protectively over her swollen belly. Every syllable, every quiver, felt like a dagger to his heart, slicing through pride, power, and the illusion of control he had clung to. The weight of her words crushed him more effectively than any rival's bullet or boardroom defeat. He dropped to his knees in the snow-soaked alley, his coat soaked and muddy, the cold cutting into his skin, mingling with the stinging realization of what he had done and what he had allowed to happen. He pressed his forehead to her worn-out shoes, feeling the leather against his damp cheek, the faint smell of her detergent and soap, a homely, human scent he had long forgotten, filling his senses. The luxury of his penthouse, the power of his empire, the loyalty of his guards, all of it vanished. He was nothing here. He was stripped bare, a man humbled, crying openly as he begged silently for forgiveness he didn't deserve. Nora's lips trembled, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall fully. The wind whipped through the alley, tugging at the loose strands of her hair, and Willie reached out instinctively, only to have her recoil, body rigid with fear. I'm not the enemy," he croaked, voice broken, raw. I never meant to." His words faltered, dissolving in the night air, meaningless compared to the months of neglect and torment his absence had caused. She flinched as he inched closer, and the snow beneath him crunched like brittle glass, each sound amplified in the silent, tense alley. The attacker stirred slightly, groaning, a reminder that danger still lingered, that violence had not fully released its grip. Willie glanced down, his hand instinctively twitching, ready to strike again if necessary, but Nora's hands tightened over her stomach, trembling, signaling a fragility he had never seen before. Her body seemed to be made entirely of tension, a taut line between life and danger, and Willie felt helpless in a way that stripped him of every shred of authority. He realized then that the fight was no longer about the man in the alley, it was about her survival, her trust, and the life that depended on it. A sudden noise, a clatter of a trash can lid, the distant bark of a stray dog, the hiss of rain on metal, made her jump violently, and Willie's heart leapt into his throat. Every shadow seemed to morph, every sound magnified, every movement carrying potential doom. He could feel her panic as a physical force, and the sight of her eyes, wide, shimmering, pleading, made him want to shield her from every hardship, every danger, every reminder that he had failed her. "Nora," he whispered, voice almost swallowed by the rain, "please, look at me. I'm here, I'm not leaving." Her gaze flickered reluctant, wary, and then back to the wet alley. The life growing inside her shifted, a subtle kick, a reminder of innocence and vulnerability that had been the center of her world all these months. She winced, a soft cry escaping, and Willie's hands hovered, unsure how to touch without frightening her, unsure how to comfort someone who had every reason to despise him. His jacket was wet, stiff against his arms, the snow melting into a chilling cold that gnawed at his bones. But he didn't care. Nothing mattered but the fragile line of life between her knees and the sky above. Her sobs grew louder, more desperate, and Willie could feel the depth of her isolation, the months of hardship he had ignored. He tried again, softer this time, leaning closer. He stopped. Words weren't enough. Actions had to speak, and the tension in her body told him that words alone could never repair what pride and anger had destroyed. She flinched as his hand brushed against hers, pulling back immediately, body coiled in instinctive defense. Then, without warning, the cold, hard reality of the night hit them both. Nora gasped, clutching her stomach with both hands, her eyes widening in sheer panic. It's too early, Willie, help him," she cried, her voice breaking in terror. The sound echoed off the narrow walls of the alley, a piercing cry that mixed fear, urgency, and a raw, unfiltered plea for survival. Willie's chest constricted as he saw the unmistakable signs her water had broken in the snow, the rain mixing with the sudden flood of warmth, and he realized that life and death were balanced on the edge of a knife in that frozen, merciless night. The alley no longer felt empty, it was alive with tension. The snow, the cold, the shadows, the man unconscious in the puddle, all became part of a scene that demanded immediate action. Willie's instincts roared back into dominance, not the boss of a city, not the tycoon with a flawless empire, but the desperate, raw, human instinct to protect life, to salvage what could be salvaged. He bent lower, trying to keep himself calm as adrenaline pumped through his veins, every drop of rain feeling like a drumbeat counting down to something irreversible. Nora's trembling hands pressed desperately against her stomach, her face pale, eyes wide, tears streaking wet tracks down her cheeks. Please, don't let him. Her voice cracked and faded into a whimper, leaving Willie with only the weight of responsibility pressing onto his shoulders like an iron plate. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, the air sharp with cold, wet, and the metallic tang of blood, and Willie realized there was no time for hesitation, no room for error. Every decision he had ever made had led to this moment, the chance to redeem himself, the chance to protect the very life he had almost destroyed. And yet, as he looked around the alley, soaked to the bone, shivering, the wind whipping icy needles of rain across his face, he understood the magnitude of what had just begun. He could save her or fail, and if he failed, nothing else in his life would ever matter again. Fivi, the fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor, reflected off the polished linoleum like shards of cold ice, making Willie's already tense nerves vibrate with every step. His shoes squeaked against the floor as he paced, the sound mingling with the low hum of distant monitors, the metallic clang of gurneys rolling down halls, and the muffled cries of patients somewhere beyond the sterile walls. Each movement reminded him of how far from control he truly was. No empire, no Mafia ties, no bodyguards could shield him from the helplessness that now gripped him. His expensive suit, once a symbol of authority, was soaked with rainwater, dirt from the alley, and patches of Nora's blood, and it clung to his body like a second skin, suffocating him with guilt. Every step echoed inside him, reverberating with memories he had tried to bury, the nights he abandoned her, the accusations, the rage that had cost him everything. He found himself outside the NECU and maternity wing, the glass doors fogged with condensation from the warmth inside, the soft cries of newborns faintly audible, a cruel contrast to the pounding of his own heart. Willie's hands shook slightly, and he ran a hand through his hair, feeling the wet strands stick to his forehead, the slick tension of the night clinging to him. He could hear the mechanical hiss of oxygen machines, the occasional beep of monitors, and the soft antiseptic smell that filled the corridors like a bitter perfume of hope and fear combined. His eyes were drawn to the glass, watching Nora lie on the narrow bed, her pale face almost translucent under the harsh hospital lights, the IV lines like veins of silver tethering her to life. The memory of her trembling in the alley, the terror, the desperation, the water breaking, haunted him as vividly as the current sight of her fragile body. Her hand, tiny and delicate against the thrum of life, sustaining tubes, reminded him of the countless times he had held her before, making empty promises while shoving her away with his arrogance. Each beep of the heart monitor felt like a hammer striking a nail into the coffin of his pride. Each pulse a reminder that she had survived the streets, the hardship, the fear. But she might not survive the night. His knees ached from pacing, from standing, from the weight of guilt pressing down, as if the universe had finally delivered justice in the cruelest form. He could hear footsteps approaching, soft, measured, purposeful, and glanced to see nurses hustling past, their white shoes squeaking against the polished floor, their faces etched with concern and exhaustion. One paused briefly, glancing at Willie as though she could sense the storm of grief and desperation radiating from him. He looked down at his hands, clenched so tight the knuckles had gone white, and noticed the faint tremor in his fingers, the tremor that came from realizing that he could lose everything in a heartbeat, that wealth and power were meaningless against the fragility of human life. He sank onto the nearest bench, the cold metal biting into his thighs, and buried his face in his hands. The sterile scent of antiseptic mixed with the faint metallic tang of blood, bringing memories of the alley rushing back in waves, Nora screaming, her hands on her belly, the rain soaking everything, the snow turning red in places he didn't want to remember. Every second spent in that chair felt stretched into eternity, the minutes measured by the rhythmic beeping of machines, the distant ring of a telephone somewhere in the labyrinth of the hospital, the faint rustle of scrubs as doctors and nurses passed by. In that liminal space between hope and despair, Willie's mind replayed the scenes of their life before the betrayal, the nights he had held her close, the warmth of her hand in his, the scent of her shampoo and soap lingering on his coat as he had left her apartment, unaware that the love of his life had been crushed beneath his anger and arrogance. Now, seeing her so fragile, so vulnerable, the full magnitude of his mistakes hit him like a tidal wave. His chest ached, lungs burned, but he forced himself to inhale deeply, the sharp antiseptic air cutting into his nostrils as he tried to focus, tried to stay tethered to the present rather than being swept away by the flood of guilt. He remembered the private investigator's report, the nights she had gone without proper food, the hours she had worked in silence, refusing his name or help, surviving on scraps and ingenuity, while he had been luxuriating in his penthouse, surrounded by opulence and indifferent servants. The realization that the woman he had destroyed, the child she carried, and the life she had been forced to endure, all because of his rage, hit him with a sharp clarity. He wanted to shout, to fall on the floor and beg for forgiveness, but he had no words that could possibly reach the depth of her pain. Minutes, or hours, seemed to pass in a blur of muted light, the corridor stretching endlessly in both directions, the antiseptic smell mingling with the faint scent of flowers from the hospital lobby, and Willie remained glued to the glass. He could see the head nurse adjusting Nora's IV, the pale, almost ghostly shimmer of her skin in the fluorescent light, the way her hair fell over her forehead in damp strands, her eyelids fluttering with exhaustion. Each small movement, her hand twitching, the faint rise and fall of her chest, was a pulse of life he clung to, a reminder that she was still here, that she was still fighting. His thoughts drifted briefly to Camille, the fiancée he had left behind in a world of silk and socialite parties, and a wave of guilt and shame crashed over him. The comparison was unbearable, Camille's elegance and privilege versus Nora's struggle and resilience. How could he have been so blind? How could he have abandoned the one person who had truly loved him, the only woman whose heartbeat had ever synchronized with his own in perfect harmony? He closed his eyes, willing himself to breathe, willing himself to find strength in a moment where strength seemed impossible. The night dragged on, punctuated by the occasional cough, the distant clatter of carts, the rustle of nurses checking charts, the faint ringing of a pager somewhere beyond the corridor. Willie's suit, stiff and cold, chafed against his skin, but he did not move to change it. Every discomfort was a reminder of the alley, the rain, the snow, the cold that had failed to kill her, but had driven home the urgency of now. He realized that he had been living in a world of illusion, of power, money, influence, while real life, real suffering, and real love existed just beyond the walls he had built around himself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door to the operating theater opened. The head surgeon emerged, mask pulled down, hair damp with sweat, eyes tired but precise. Willie's heart lurched violently as the man's gaze met his. Every muscle in his body tightened, breath caught in his throat. The surgeon's voice, calm but heavy, carried across the corridor with the weight of judgment and hope intertwined. "We saved the baby, but the mother." He paused, removed the mask fully, letting the dampness of his breath fog the glasses perched on his nose, and sighed. "She's slipping away." The words hit Willie like a sledgehammer, the sterile air around him turning viscous, every sound muted except for the echo of the surgeon's voice in his skull. He staggered, hand gripping the back of a chair for support, feeling as though the floor had opened beneath him. The baby, his child, alive, but Nora was teetering on the edge of existence, and he was powerless to intervene. Every instinct screamed to run, to enter the theater, to grab her hand, to claw at life itself for a second chance, but hospital rules, human limitations, the cruel separation between life and death kept him outside, tethered only by the weight of helplessness. His chest heaved, shoulders quaking, as the fluorescent lights flickered faintly above, casting moving shadows that mirrored the turmoil within him. The cold metal of the bench bit into his legs as he sank, eyes locked on the opaque doors, mind spinning with memories, regrets, fears and prayers. He felt utterly naked in that moment, not in body, but in soul. The empire, the wealth, the power, none of it mattered. Everything he had built could not buy one more heartbeat of hers. And as he sat, trembling, every second stretching into eternity, he realized that the true battle had only just begun. Between life and death, between the past and the chance for redemption, between love lost and the possibility of forgiveness. 60. The ICU smelled of antiseptic and fear, a sterile fog that clung to Willie's suit as he burst past the protest of the nurses, ignoring their frantic voices, the alarms blaring in protest like mechanical shrieks. Each step he took echoed in the room, a hollow drumbeat against the tiled floor, and the smell of warmed rubber from the oxygen tubes mixed with the metallic tang of blood that lingered faintly in the air. His chest heaved, the adrenaline from the alley still pulsing through his veins, making his hands shake as he reached Nora's side. Her hand was cold, fragile like porcelain, and he wrapped both of his around it, feeling the tiny tremor, the whisper of life that still clung stubbornly to her. He leaned over her, pressing his forehead against her arm for just a moment, breathing in the faint scent of soap and antiseptic that lingered on her skin, a reminder of every morning he had ever left her, every time he had failed her. His voice broke the sterile quiet, thick with tears trembling like a fragile bridge over the chasm of her unconsciousness. "Nora, listen to me," he whispered, the words scraping raw against his own throat. "I was blind. I was an idiot. I let everything fall apart, but I'm here now. I promise I'm not going anywhere." The machines hummed and beeped around them, the flatline monitor a constant reminder of how close he had come to losing her entirely. He pressed his lips to her hand, closing his eyes briefly, tasting the bitterness of regret on his own lips. The soft rustle of the sheets as he adjusted her position made him flinch. Every sound, every tiny motion was magnified in the vacuum of fear that had settled in his chest. His mind raced, replaying the moments that had led them here, the betrayal he had imagined, the rage that had cost him her, the lies planted by his own brother to drive a wedge between them. Each memory felt like a shard of glass pressed against his heart. He whispered, recounting the future he had imagined during the months of her absence, a life he had already planned in his mind with painstaking detail. "The house by the lake," he murmured, voice catching on the words. "I've already found it, the one you always dreamed of. The garden, tulips, lilies, everything you said you wanted, I've mapped it out. And the nursery blue like the morning sky, just like you wanted. It's waiting for you, Nora, for us." His words tumbled out in a torrent, some fragmented, some complete, but all soaked with a desperation he had never allowed himself to feel before. He paused, pressing his forehead against hers gently, feeling the warmth of her skin, so faint, so fleeting. "Do you hear me?" he asked softly, almost to himself, almost as a prayer. "It was never you. Those photos, those lies, my brother did it, he wanted to destroy us. But I've handled them, I've made sure the traitors are gone. Only you matter. Only you and the child matter." The words came faster now, more desperate, as if saying them aloud could somehow pull her back from the edge. A small, flickering pulse appeared on the monitor, barely noticeable, but Willie felt his chest tighten as hope struck him like lightning. He pressed closer, murmuring again, repeating promises, confessions, and pleas in a voice that cracked under the weight of the past 8 months. "I will spend every second of the rest of my life making up for the hell I put you through. Every second. I will never leave your side again, never." His hand brushed a damp strand of hair from her forehead, fingers lingering, memorizing the softness, the texture, the warmth that he had taken for granted. The room was silent except for the beeping of the monitors and the faint hiss of the ventilator, yet every heartbeat of his seemed to reverberate louder than any machine. He leaned closer, voice low and ragged, speaking more to himself than to her. "I failed you, Nora. I failed our child. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you away, by believing lies, but all I did was break us. All I did was destroy the one thing that mattered." His lips pressed against her wrist, the skin soft and trembling under his touch, and he closed his eyes as tears slipped down his face, hot and shameful. He could feel the weight of every second, the gravity of every month lost, pressing down upon him. Outside the ICU, the hallway was empty, the distant hum of activity like echoes from another world. Nurses occasionally peeked in, tense and cautious, but he barely noticed them. All that existed in his vision was her fragile body, the tiny hand clinging to life, and the pulse of hope that had dared to flicker just once. Willie spoke in fragments now, thoughts scattering across the floor of his mind like broken glass. "I thought I could live without you. I was wrong. I thought I could control everything, but I couldn't control you, couldn't control the child, couldn't control life itself. And I was stupid. I was cruel. I am so sorry. His lips pressed against her forehead, lingering, almost afraid to lift them, as though the physical contact could somehow tether her to him in defiance of death itself. The monitor's faint blip, so small it could be mistaken for a technical hiccup, made his breath catch. He leaned in closer, whispering fragments of the life he had imagined for them, his voice soft yet urgent, vibrating with raw emotion. He told her about the nursery curtains, the toys lined up in perfect rows, the soft blue walls, the crib he had installed himself. He spoke of walks by the lake at sunrise, of coffee in the mornings, of laughter echoing through empty hallways, of promises kept this time. Every word was a thread cast toward her, a desperate attempt to weave her back into life. He pressed his forehead to hers again, murmuring, almost in prayer, "Please, open your eyes. See me. See the child. See the world we can still have. I won't let it slip away again." His voice cracked, tears falling freely, soaking into the sleeve of his suit. I can't live if I lose you again. Please, fight, Nora. Fight for us." For a moment, the silence was overwhelming. The mechanical hum of the machines, the faint odor of antiseptic, the distant murmur of a passing nurse. It all merged into a slow, oppressive rhythm. Willie felt himself trembling from exhaustion, from fear, from the weight of love and guilt pressing down on him like a physical force. Yet he could not leave, could not step back, could not rest while her life hung by a thread. Then, a small, miraculous movement. Nora's eyelids fluttered, barely perceptible, like the tremor of a candle's flame in a draught. Willie's heart jumped violently, chest constricting, as if the air itself had turned to fire. He leaned closer, whispering her name in a trembling breath, repeating the life he had imagined for them, repeating every apology, every promise, every confession he had stored for this moment. Her eyes opened for a fraction of a second, a sliver of recognition passing through them, and Willie held his breath, almost afraid to blink, almost afraid that any motion could make it vanish. Then, her lips moved, forming a single word, whispered, fragile, filled with both pain and accusation. Why? The word hung in the air, a delicate, lethal weight pressing on him, every syllable cutting deeper than any blade could. His chest tightened, breath caught, and the room seemed to freeze, the monitors, the alarms, the cold antiseptic air, all suspended as though time itself had paused to witness the raw, unfiltered emotion between them. The whispered vow of survival, of redemption, of love, it now demanded an answer he wasn't sure he could give. And for the first time, Willie realized that words, wealth, power, even tears, they might not be enough. Not now. Not here. Not against the depth of pain he had caused. The weeks passed like slow-motion storms. Every day Willie watched Nora from across the room, her fragile figure rocking their newborn, Liam, in her arms, humming softly in a voice he barely remembered. The air in the mansion smelled of baby powder and fresh linen, a softness that contrasted sharply with the weight of guilt hanging over him. He followed her movements with a hollow gaze, noticing the way her fingers brushed Liam's tiny cheeks, how she leaned close, her hair falling in soft, brown waves over her face. Every detail he memorized, every breath she took, was a reminder that she had survived, that their child had survived. But her spirit remained a locked room he could not enter. He had sent Camille away 2 weeks earlier, his so-called fiancée, promising her the wedding she had been counting on, only to cancel in the last hour. The city was buzzing with whispers of the Mafia wedding of the century. Reporters speculating, security on edge, but Willie had no interest. Nothing mattered except the woman in front of him, the woman whose every glance avoided him, whose eyes remained fixed on Liam, whose soft hums punctuated the tense silence like fragile music. On the day the wedding was meant to take place, Willie entered Nora's room carrying the ivory silk gown she had poured her soul into for Camille. The dress, folded carefully in his arms, smelled faintly of fabric softener and Nora's meticulous handiwork, of every painstaking stitch and painstaking effort she had made in spite of her grief. He laid the gown on the polished marble floor of her room, watching as her fingers twitched, almost reflexively reaching for it, but she stopped herself. Her eyes flickered toward him, a mixture of confusion and distrust, and he saw the faintest quiver in her lips. "I need you to see this, Nora," he said, voice low and trembling, holding back the raw weight of the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He reached for a pair of expensive shears he had hidden in his pocket, the metal cold and heavy in his palm. Each step toward the dress felt like walking through a hurricane, the tension in the room thick enough to choke. He lowered himself onto the floor, careful not to step on Liam's toys, and positioned the shears above the pristine silk. "This dress," he began, voice breaking, "was a symbol of my vanity, of my pride, of everything I valued over the only thing that ever mattered, over you." He paused, letting the words sink into the air like lead. "I don't want a queen, Nora. I want the girl who sewed this dress, while her heart was breaking, the girl who risked everything to keep her dignity, to protect the life growing inside her, to keep our child alive. His eyes burned with unspent tears as he pressed the shears into the fabric and made the first cut. The silk resisted, the fibers tearing with a high-pitched, almost musical rip that made Nora wince. She flinched as he cut deeper, and her hand twitched toward him, but she didn't stop him. She remained seated on the edge of the velvet chaise, Liam cradled in her arms, eyes wide with disbelief. The pieces of fabric fluttered to the floor like wounded birds, and Willie felt his own chest constrict, each shred of silk a physical manifestation of the walls he had built between them. "Do you understand, Nora?" he whispered, voice trembling with urgency, kneeling amid the ruined dress. "Every stitch, every thread, every ounce of this vanity, I don't want it, I want you. And I need you to know that no one else, no city, no power, no title, means anything if I don't have you and him." His hands shook as he lifted a piece of shredded silk, letting it fall like fragile snow to the marble floor. The motion was slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial, a surrender of everything he had once valued over love. Nora's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes dark pools reflecting the storm of emotion in the room. She remained still, rocking Liam gently, the baby stirring in response to the tension, tiny hands grasping at his mother's blouse. Willie's voice caught again as he spoke, stepping closer, kneeling beside her. "I failed you before," he said softly, almost a whisper, "and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't live like this anymore. I can't," he faltered, the words choking in his throat as his fingers brushed hers for a fleeting, electrifying moment. Nora's eyes flicked to his, icy yet soft, and she finally spoke, voice quiet, measured, almost dangerous in its calm. "Willie, why now?" The question cut deeper than the shears had cut the silk, deeper than any humiliation he had endured. She shifted Liam in her arms, instinctively shielding him, her gaze unwavering as though trying to see into the very marrow of his soul. He swallowed, trying to steady the torrent of emotions threatening to burst. "Because now I know what truly matters," he said, each word deliberate, trembling with sincerity. "Because now I understand what love is, Nora. And because now I know I would rather lose everything else in the world than lose you and him." He reached out, placing his hand on hers again, letting their fingers linger like fragile bridges over the chasm of time lost. The air between them grew taut, electric, filled with the scent of fresh linen, baby powder, and the faint trace of her shampoo, memories from months ago flooding back. The shards of silk lay scattered at their feet, and Willie felt the weight of each piece, a physical symbol of the destruction he had caused and the fragile hope he now offered. Nora's hand hovered over one of the torn pieces, trembling slightly, and for a moment, Willie thought she might retreat, that the walls he had tried to dismantle would rise again. Instead, she slowly stood, every movement deliberate, eyes never leaving the floor. Liam stirred again, tiny fingers curling around her blouse, and she bent slightly to adjust him, her hair cascading like a curtain of brown silk over her shoulders. She picked up a small, jagged fragment of the ivory silk, holding it delicately between thumb and forefinger, and Willie's breath caught in his chest. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, the air thick and heavy with anticipation. The baby stirred once more, tiny sounds like a fragile heartbeat in the quiet, echoing the tension between them. Then, in a movement so unexpected it froze him in place, she did something Willie had never imagined. She folded the torn silk with a reverence that contrasted sharply with the destruction around them. Her eyes met his, dark, unreadable, and the corner of her mouth lifted in a faint, almost imperceptible curve, a signal that he had yet to decipher. "Willie," she said softly, voice low and shaking with a mixture of anger, exhaustion, and something else he couldn't yet name. "Do you truly understand what this means?" Her hand lingered on the fragment, holding it as if it were a relic, a testimony of pain and resilience. For a moment, the world outside the mansion ceased to exist. The echoes of the city, the distant hum of reporters, the expectation of a million eyes watching, they all faded to nothing. The room contained only Willie, Nora Liam, and the remnants of a wedding dress that symbolized everything they had lost and everything they might still regain. Willie felt his chest constrict, heart hammering like a war drum, as he took a cautious step closer. "I do," he whispered, voice breaking, "and I swear to you I will spend every second proving it, every single second. Just tell me how." Nora's eyes softened, but only slightly. The tension in her shoulders did not ease, her hand did not drop, her voice did not fully reveal her surrender. Yet the small act of holding the fragment, the tiniest acknowledgement of his intentions, was enough to ignite hope. And then she did the unthinkable. She held the torn silk toward him, a silent, shocking invitation. Willie's breath caught. The room seemed to collapse into the narrow channel of possibility, a precipice over which he had waited months to lean. The fragment, delicate and jagged, became a bridge between them, fragile but undeniable. The baby stirred once again, tiny kicks against her rib, reminding Willie of the life they had created together. The stakes that had never been higher, the love that had survived betrayal, pain and months of distance. And just as Willie reached out to take the silk from her hand, the door to the room creaked open, a shadow falling across the threshold. Willie turned sharply, heart hammering, because the figure in the doorway was neither nurse nor servant, and the soft click of heels on the marble sent a jolt of tension through the air. Nora froze, Liam clutched to her chest, eyes darting toward the doorway, and Willie's hand hovered mid-air, torn between protecting her and understanding the new threat. The torn silk fluttered slightly in her trembling fingers, a fragile banner of the battle yet to be won. And in that frozen, suspended moment the chapter ended, not with clarity, not with surrender, but with a question hanging in the air, heavy, fragile, and impossible to ignore. 80. The morning sunlight filtered through the nursery window, scattering warm gold across the scattered remnants of the shredded silk and the soft, pastel walls that now smelled faintly of Liam's baby powder and the lingering scent of Nora's shampoo. Willie stood near the doorway, watching silently as Nora knelt on the floor, her small, precise hands moving over the fragments of ivory silk. She didn't speak, she didn't cry, instead, her movements were deliberate, almost meditative. A quiet ritual that seemed to stitch the past together in ways words never could. She picked up a tiny needle and thread from the bedside table, her fingers trembling slightly as she began to weave the jagged pieces together, not as a dress, not as a symbol of vanity, but as a small, soft blanket, white and pristine, meant for their son. Each stitch was slow, almost ceremonial, and Willie felt the air thicken around him, heavy with the weight of everything they had survived. He crouched beside her, careful not to startle her, and watched as the blanket slowly took shape. The way she held Liam against her chest, his tiny eyes blinking at the sudden brightness of the morning sun, reminded him of all the nights he had spent chasing power and wealth while she had been struggling alone. Now, in this quiet moment, he understood the magnitude of what he had lost, and the magnitude of what he had found. Willie's hands shook, not with anger, not with pride, but with the raw, unfiltered ache of love and regret. He reached out, letting his fingers brush hers over the tiny blanket, and she didn't pull away. She didn't even look at him. Instead, she focused on the fabric, her lips pressed together in a line of concentration, a delicate furrow on her brow. "I never stopped thinking about you," Willie whispered, voice hoarse, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for months. "Not once. Not for a second, and I'm not going to stop now." Nora's eyes flicked toward him, just for a moment, a glimmer of recognition in their depth, but the wall around her heart remained firm. She let her hands continue the rhythmic motion of sewing, each stitch a heartbeat, a reminder that life, even when broken, could still be mended. Willie's chest tightened as he realized that this small act, this gentle creation, was more beautiful than any gown he had ever seen, more meaningful than any power he had ever wielded. Do you think it will be enough?" she asked finally, voice soft, almost a whisper. "Enough to forgive me for everything?" Willie shook his head slowly, his eyes dark with emotion. "No," he admitted, his voice low, raw. "Nothing could erase the pain. Nothing could undo the months I made you live through alone. But I can promise you this, I will spend every moment of my life trying to make it right. And I will protect him, protect you, until my last breath." Nora's fingers paused mid-stitch, her gaze lifting to meet his. The tension in the room was thick, almost tangible, yet beneath it lay a fragile thread of trust, slowly forming like the delicate weave of the blanket before them. The baby stirred in her arms, tiny fingers curling around Nora's blouse, and she smiled for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a small, hesitant curve of her lips, but enough to make Willie's heart shatter and mend at the same time. The sun hit her face, illuminating the faint lines of exhaustion, the traces of tears she had cried, the quiet resilience of a woman who had endured everything and emerged stronger. Willie reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, letting his fingers linger on her cheek. "I've waited for that," he whispered. "I've waited for that smile." Nora's eyes softened, a spark of warmth breaking through the frost around her heart. She held the baby closer, rocking him gently, and for a moment, the room was filled with nothing but the soft sounds of Liam's breathing, the faint creak of the floorboards, and the golden morning light spilling across their little sanctuary. Willie knelt beside them, letting his hands rest on the floor near hers, feeling the rhythm of life, the pulse of family, and the fragile but undeniable bond that had survived betrayal, pain, and months of distance. "I don't need a wedding," Willie said softly, almost to himself but loud enough for Nora to hear. "I don't need celebrations or titles. All I need is this, us, him, you right here." Nora glanced at him, her eyes holding both caution and curiosity, and then slowly returned to her sewing, the soft motion of the needle through fabric a gentle testament to her resilience. The sound was soothing, hypnotic, and Willie found himself breathing slowly for the first time in weeks, letting the tension leave his shoulders in long, shuddering exhalations. Hours passed like this, quiet, filled with small gestures, soft touches, and the gentle hum of life that had returned to their home. Willie watched Nora, memorizing every curve of her hands, the way she tilted her head, the faint tremor in her fingers that spoke of fatigue but also of relentless strength. He reached for Lam, letting the baby's small body rest against his chest, feeling the warmth of life he had fought so hard to preserve. Nora's eyes flicked to him, cautious but observant, and he held her gaze, silent but pleading for trust, for a chance to rebuild what he had shattered. Finally, Nora set the blanket aside and leaned back, letting Liam sleep against her shoulder. She met Willie's eyes fully now, a silent conversation passing between them, heavy with unspoken words and shared history. Willie's chest ached with longing, guilt, and love, all at once, and he whispered, "I have one more surprise." Nora's eyebrows lifted, curiosity and caution warring on her face. She didn't move, didn't speak, but the slight shift in her posture betrayed a flicker of hope she didn't want to admit. He moved to the door and opened it slowly, and there, standing in the golden glow of the morning sun, was the one person Nora thought she had lost forever. A figure from the past, yet impossibly real, their presence filling the room with a gravity that made both Nora and Willie stop in their tracks. The baby stirred in her arms, sensing the tension, and Nora's eyes widened in disbelief, tears brimming but unspilled. Willie's hand remained extended toward the doorway, heart hammering with anticipation, and for the first time in months, the air was charged not with fear or regret, but with the possibility of something entirely new, hope, reconciliation, and the fragile, breathtaking beginning of a family finally whole. Nora slowly lowered Liam into Willie's arms, her fingers brushing his gently, a silent act of trust. She inhaled deeply, the scent of morning light, baby powder, and the faint trace of her tears mingling in the air, and allowed herself to stand fully, the weight of the past 8 months pressing down yet somehow feeling lighter in the presence of Willie, and the figure in the doorway. Willie's hands shook, gripping the baby carefully, eyes darting between Nora and the figure before them, heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the fragile pulse of new beginnings. The room held its breath, the sun spilling across the hardwood floors, the torn silk blanket lying like a symbol of past pain now transformed into hope. Nora's gaze softened, Willie's shoulders slackened, and for a moment, all that existed was their little family, the miracle of survival, and the promise of tomorrow. And in that suspended, golden moment, the story didn't end with grand gestures, titles or celebrations. It ended with life itself, fragile, chaotic, beautiful, and finally whole. From heartbreak to redemption, from betrayal to the fragile beginnings of a family reborn, Nora and Willie's journey proves that love doesn't just survive, it fights, it sacrifices, and it transforms. If their story touched you, made your heart race, or brought a tear to your eye, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the next story promises even more twists, passion, and unforgettable moments. And tell us in the comments, if you had one chance to fix the biggest mistake of your life, would you take it, like Willie did?